There are nights that feel ordinary until the world tilts. Nights when a young woman laughs with friends, walks toward a familiar apartment, and imagines tomorrow unfolding the way it always has. But on October 11, 2016, in the quiet college town of Alpine, Texas, tomorrow never arrived for 21-year-old Zuzu Verk. She stepped into the night with trust. She stepped toward someone she loved. She stepped into a story that would end in silence. A silence broken only 2 weeks later, when a shallow grave whispered the truth Alpine had been trying to ignore. And the man the world thought she trusted became the man investigators could no longer look away from. Before the headlines, before the missing posters, before the quiet terror that swept across the community, there was simply Zuzu Verk. Born in Fort Worth, raised in a family that celebrated her curiosity, Zuzu Verk was the kind of young woman who filled spaces with warmth. She was adventurous, bright, driven by a restless desire to learn and explore. Friends described her as intuitive, someone who sensed when others were hurting and stepped in without hesitation. She was majoring in biology at Sul Ross State University, balancing labs, late-night study sessions, and dreams of a career that would let her work near wildlife. She photographed the world around her. She loved fiercely, even when it made her vulnerable. Her brother later described her as someone who saw beauty in small things. And people saw beauty in her, not just in the way she lived, but in the steadiness she brought to those around her. Zuzu wasn't lost. Neither was she reckless. She was a 21-year-old woman standing at the beginning of her life, ready to build something meaningful. That's what makes her disappearance so haunting. She vanished from a place she trusted, from a person she trusted, in a town where danger felt distant. Alpine was the kind of community where everyone knew everyone, the kind of place where you waved at strangers, where you didn't expect the desert to swallow someone whole. But that's exactly what happened. To understand how this story unfolded, you have to understand the relationship at its center, the one between Zuzu Verk and her boyfriend Robert Fabian. Robert was older, charismatic in a quiet, self-contained way. He and Zuzu met through mutual friends at Sul Ross State. At first, the connection felt natural. Long conversations, late-night dinners, the kind of beginnings that feel safe. But over time, friends started noticing the fractures beneath the surface. Their relationship was intense, then unstable, then difficult to understand from the outside. Those close to Zuzu described arguments, moments of tension that didn't make sense, an emotional distance that seemed to grow even when they were physically together. There were breakups, reconciliations, confusing pauses, a cycle that kept Zuzu unsure of where she stood. And yet she cared for him, enough to try again, and overlook the darker moments. Fabian, who lived with a roommate named Chris Estrada, often presented himself as calm and collected. But in the weeks before October 11th, something shifted. Friends recalled Zuzu expressing concern about the relationship. Not panic, just uncertainty, the kind that settles in your chest like a quiet warning. That night, Zuzu attended a small gathering with friends. She wasn't drinking heavily. She wasn't distressed. She wasn't struggling. She laughed, she talked, she planned the next day. Until she said she needed to stop by Robert's apartment. Simple visit. Familiar route. A decision that felt normal. But nothing after that moment remained normal. Zuzu walked into the night. She walked toward someone she had loved. She walked into a timeline that ended abruptly, and left investigators with one haunting truth. The last person to see her alive was the man who claimed to care for her. The evening of October 11th, 2016, began without alarm. Zuzu spent time with friends. There was laughter, casual conversation, the comfort of routine. Nothing in her behavior suggested fear or distress, or the weight of an irreversible decision. She was present, grounded, planning her next day. But at around 9:30 p.m., she told her friend she needed to stop by Robert Fabian's apartment. Not for long, just a quick visit. They had argued earlier that week, and the air between them needed clearing. To Zuzu it was simple: talk tonight, settle things, move forward. She left with confidence, expecting to return home, but she didn't. What happened next survives only through traces, fragments of digital footprints, contradictory statements, and the shifting memories of the man who last saw her alive. Robert later claimed Zuzu came over, claimed they talked, claimed she left on foot after an argument, claimed he went to bed afterward. But none of it lined up. Not with the timeline, not with the evidence, not with the way he behaved in the hours and days that followed. Neighbors reported sounds in the night. Movement, something being dragged. Not loud, but not normal. At 12 a.m., Zuzu's phone went silent. Completely. No text, no calls, no location pings. For someone who was always reachable. That was the first red flag. By morning, her absence was immediate and alarming. Friends texted. No answer. By noon, concern grew into fear. By evening, the fear crystallized into a missing persons report. Alpine, a small, tightly woven community, moved fast. Students, professors, neighbors, park rangers, and officers began searching the desert terrain surrounding the town. Flyers were printed. Social media flooded with her photo. Search dogs were deployed. And yet, the person who should have been the most frantic wasn't. Robert Fabian did not join the searches. He did not call Zuzu's family. He did not assist investigators. He did not express urgency. Instead, he stayed silent. And silence, in an investigation, is its own kind of testimony. What investigators found inside his apartment would turn that silence into suspicion. As the hours passed, detectives retraced Zuzu's steps. Their first critical decision: visit the last place she was known to be alive, Fabian's apartment. The moment they entered, the timeline began to fracture. The apartment smelled strongly of bleach, unmistakable, intrusive, recent. The floors were damp. The bathroom looked freshly scrubbed. And the roommate, Chris Estrada, stumbled nervously over basic questions. But the most disturbing detail was something subtle, something investigators always pay attention to. Robert Fabian showed no curiosity about the search, no anxiety, no visible fear for Zuzu's safety. Instead, he behaved as though the problem belonged to everyone else. Officers noted inconsistencies in his story, times that didn't match, statements that shifted, details that contradicted Estrada's version of events. Fabian said Zuzu walked home, but her shoes were still in his apartment. Her car remained untouched. Her keys, wallet, and everyday belongings were missing. Items no one leaves behind voluntarily in a desert town where the nights are cold and wildlife roams the outskirts. The search radius widened. Helicopters scanned the brush. Volunteers walked miles of dry, rugged terrain. But no sign of Zuzu appeared. As hope thinned, investigators dug deeper into Robert's behavior after her disappearance. The patterns were alarming. He cleaned his apartment thoroughly, immediately after Zuzu vanished. He borrowed Estrada's car late at night. Tire tracks later linked the vehicle to remote areas outside Alpine. He asked neighbors unusual questions about police activity. And he made no attempt to contact Zuzu again after midnight. This was not the behavior of a worried boyfriend. This was the behavior of a man trying to outrun a truth the town had not yet discovered. By the end of the first week, investigators made a private shift in the case. Zuzu Verk was no longer considered missing. She was presumed dead. And the man at the center of that presumption kept changing his story. Search teams were losing daylight in the desert. Leads were thinning. And then, 2 weeks after Zuzu vanished, a discovery shattered the quiet emptiness of Brewster County. A shallow grave, a partial skeleton, and the unmistakable belongings of a young woman who never should have died alone. What came next would expose a truth more disturbing than Alpine ever imagined. 2 weeks after Zuzu vanished, the search effort had stretched into the far edges of Brewster County, a landscape of harsh brush, pale sand, and jagged desert ridges. Volunteers had walked miles. Officers had combed through canyons, ravines, creek beds. And still, hope had dwindled into quiet fear. Then came the turning point. On February 3, 2017, months after Zuzu first disappeared, a U.S. Border Patrol agent was conducting routine work in a remote area off a dirt road near Alpine. The land was rugged and isolated, the kind of terrain where wind erases footprints in hours and silence can swallow anything whole. But something stood out. A disturbance in the earth. Thin layers of dirt shifted in a way nature didn't quite match. The kind of subtle irregularity trained eyes know not to ignore. When he approached, he saw plastic sheeting, half buried beneath layers of sediment and neglect. He called it in immediately. Law enforcement arrived. Crime scene analysts knelt beside the shallow depression. They began removing the dirt, slowly, carefully, piece by piece. And then, beneath the desert's dry skin, human remains emerged. Skeletal, wrapped in thin painter's plastic, the same type investigators later tied to purchases made by Robert Fabian and Chris Estrada on the day after Zuzu vanished. It was no accident, no erosion, no wildlife scattering bones. This was a burial, deliberate, concealed, hidden in a place chosen to be forgotten. The desert does not lie. It reveals what people tried to bury. As investigators collected the remains, the evidence pointed to the truth Alpine had resisted. Zuzu Verk had not wandered off. She had not left town. She had not vanished without reason. She had been placed there, by someone who knew the land well enough to choose a hiding place only desperation creates. And that someone was the same man who insisted he had nothing to hide. The medical examiners confirmed the remains were Zuzu's through dental records. What they couldn't determine, due to decomposition and animal activity, was the exact cause of death. But forensic clarity isn't always in the bones. Sometimes it's in the choices suspects make afterward. Investigators pieced together a chilling timeline using cell phone pings, vehicle tracking, store receipts, a witness statements, a soil analysis, tire impressions, digital messaging logs, a surveillance footage, and inconsistencies in Fabian's evolving story. Here's what they found. On October 12, 2016, less than 12 hours after Zuzu disappeared, Fabian and Estrada went on a quiet but telling shopping trip. They purchased painter's plastic, ovals, gloves, cleaning supplies. Supplies they later claimed were for house chores. Their receipt timestamp aligned perfectly with the estimated time Zuzu's body would have been moved. Tire tracks from Estrada's vehicle matched impressions found near the burial site. Soil samples on the tires connected directly to the type of ground covering the shallow grave. But perhaps the most haunting clue was the timeline inside Fabian's apartment. Bleach residue found days later. Cleanliness inconsistent with normal habits. A bathroom spotless to the point of suspicion. Investigators knew what happened. They couldn't prove the exact mechanics, not yet, but they could see the truth mapped across behaviors. Zuzu Verk died inside that apartment. Her body was removed, transported, buried, then concealed beneath days of silence and lies. And the man who claimed she simply walked away had cleaned so thoroughly afterward that he erased everything except the digital trail. But digital trails are not easily erased. Phone records placed Fabian near the burial site. Estrada's phone pinged in the same area. Their stories conflicted precisely where guilt creates cracks. And as investigators confronted them, something else emerged. Estrada confessed. Chris Estrada, Fabian's roommate and longtime friend, became the linchpin in the investigation. First, he defended Robert, repeated the story, insisted Zuzu left the apartment alive. But pressure reveals truth. And investigators had pressure, in the form of a surveillance footage showing Estrada's car heading toward the burial area, a purchase receipts from the morning after Zuzu vanished, a digital timestamps showing coordination between the two men, a neighbors reporting thuds and dragging sounds the night Zuzu disappeared, inconsistent cleaning patterns in Fabian's home, a timeline only guilt could motivate. Detectives asked Estrada to explain the cleaning. He stumbled. They asked about the car. He hesitated. They asked why he drove out to the remote area, and his voice cracked. Eventually he admitted pieces. Not everything, not the whole truth, but enough. He said Fabian told him he needed help. He said Robert was panicked. He said the morning trip to purchase supplies was because Robert said they had to. He said they disposed of something heavy in the desert. He never directly stated that Robert killed Zuzu, but he didn't have to. Every admission was another thread in the woven truth. Zuzu didn't leave that apartment alive. Her death was covered, concealed, and buried, and Fabian led the way. On February 4, 2017, the day after her remains were found, authorities moved swiftly. Robert Fabian was arrested on a warrant for tampering with or fabricating physical evidence by concealing a human corpse. It wasn't the murder charge everyone expected. Not yet. Not without cause of death. But it was a step. Crucial one. A legal foothold in a case built on lies, silence, and desert wind. What happened next, in interrogation rooms and courtroom benches, would expose a betrayal deeper than the desert grave itself. By the time authorities arrested Robert Fabian on the charge of tampering with physical evidence by concealing a human corpse, the community of Alpine already understood the truth. They just didn't have the legal language for it yet. Inside the interrogation room, Robert remained cold, as if each answer were weighed, polished, and presented with caution rather than grief. He denied wrongdoing, denied harming Zuzu, denied burying her body, denied the evidence placed in front of him piece by piece. He claimed he didn't know how Zuzu ended up dead. He claimed he didn't know who moved her. He claimed she left his apartment alive, even though evidence contradicted him at every turn. Estrada's statements had cracked open the case, but even with those admissions, prosecutors faced a wall. Without a confirmed cause of death, without a physical body intact enough to show trauma, murder charges couldn't immediately be filed. Texas law required certainty, and certainty was exactly what the desert had eroded. But the truth was still visible in the choices Robert made. The bleach-soaked rooms, the early morning store purchases, the mysterious nighttime drive, the shallow grave, the painter's plastic matching their receipt, the tire impressions, the digital footprints placing Fabian at the burial site, his absolute refusal to help find Zuzu, his complete lack of emotion when her remains were discovered. Prosecutors tightened their strategy. They built the case around actions, not cause of death. Around behavior, not confession. Around deception, not physical evidence. And so, when Fabian was finally brought into court, it wasn't for murder, but for what investigators could prove. He tampered with Zuzu's remains. He attempted to hide a crime. He concealed a human corpse. The courtroom grew heavy as the details unfolded. Each witness added weight. Each receipt added clarity. Each forensic finding carved the truth deeper. Fabian offered no explanation, no apology, no story that aligned with reality. He simply sat, rigid, distant, as if detaching himself from the trial might detach him from the truth. But the truth doesn't loosen its grip that easily. When the verdict came, it wasn't the justice Zuzu's family deserved, but it was justice the system was able to deliver. Fabian was convicted of tampering with evidence, specifically for concealing Zuzu's body. But punishment does not fill the absence left behind. Zuzu's family carried a grief that didn't fade. Friends mourned a life with promise. Alpine, a small desert town once known for its quiet simplicity, became a symbol of heartbreak and caution. Her case sparked conversations about domestic relationship red flags, the vulnerability of young adults in unstable relationships, the gaps in forensic capability in cases where decomposition limits answers, the need for community awareness when someone goes missing, the responsibility friends and universities have when concerns arise. The Biological Sciences program at Sul Ross remembered her not as a case, but as a young woman with curiosity that stretched beyond textbooks. Her classmates described her as gentle and fiercely loyal. Professors remembered her as thoughtful and engaged. Her family continued searching, not for her but for meaning, for closure, for reform. They refused to let her name dissolve into a headline. They wanted her remembered as she truly was. Daughter, sister, friend. A bright, hopeful young woman whose trust was betrayed not by the world at large, but by someone she believed loved her. Zuzu's story became a warning about hidden danger, danger that doesn't arrive loudly but quietly through someone familiar, someone close, someone who knows exactly how to hide a truth until it can no longer be found. And in the end, the desert wind carried the final echo, a reminder of a life stolen too soon, and a truth buried too deep. Zuzu Verk never intended to become a symbol. She simply wanted to live. And in remembering her, we honor the life she was building, and the light she carried into every room. If you found this case fascinating, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. We post crime case videos every night. Until next time, stay sharp, stay vigilant.